Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown podcast featuring PennLive Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh. Nick is fresh from Mike Tomlin's press conference ahead of the regular season opener in Atlanta versus the Falcons, and he's going to give us all the news from the coach. But I also want to set up the context that Nick has witnessed over these last 4 years that he's been covering the team. He's seen Tomlin bring in a new starting quarterback in each one of these 4 seasons, going back to the last season of Ben Roethlisberger, then the Mitch Trubisky experiment that lasted all of 4 games. Then, of course, it was the high hopes of Kenny Pickett. And now we have the sort of so-so reception of Russell Wilson. And so that's a unique situation for Tomlin. And I'm really curious from Nick, the demeanor and the confidence and the body language from Tomlin over those 4 seasons, if there's any detectable difference. Now, one constant has been an offensive line that is unstable at best and maybe a real concern at worst. And we certainly this is a patchwork offensive line mostly due to injury entering the season. So, Nick, break that all down for us if you can.
Yeah, the offensive line is going to be a very interesting thing to watch. So basically, John, we don't have any definitive answers outside of the fact we know Spencer Anderson will start at left guard. Isaac Seumalo is out with that pec injury he suffered last Wednesday. A freak injury in practice. He's probably going to miss 2 or 3 games, which is a big loss. I think he's their best offensive lineman. But Spencer Anderson, second-year man out of Maryland, can play all 5 positions. Will start at left guard. He's been the main backup all summer. This is not a surprise. He's gotten better this summer. He's had a really good summer. They're really excited about Spencer Anderson. He did enough to even beat out Mason McCormick, who the rookie guard that they drafted out of South Dakota State, who had a really good summer himself. They're really excited about that. So we'll see there. I think the tackles are going to be really interesting, John, because I don't think we really know yet where this is going to go, because Troy Fautanu practiced for the first time yesterday since his MCL sprain. And by practice, I mean he had done stuff off to the side. He had, done sprints and run and did some pass sets last week. But this time he actually went in, to individual drills. He did some team stuff. He was limited, but he still was out there. They saw him out there for the first time since that injury. John, he looked really good. I mean, he really did. He was moving at a very high level. He looks like his athleticism is there. He looks good. And so you think about that and you say, okay, you can work with that. But I don't know what you do with a rookie that has missed that much time. And I think that's going to be where it is. But I think, as we talked about when this injury happened, John, I think this has had a bad effect on Bradrick Jones. He is a guy that I think they would have liked to put at left tackle. I think they were starting to transition him over to left tackle. And then Troy Fautanu gets hurt and they can't. So he's only played right tackle. They played him at left tackle last Wednesday. And that was the first time since Troy Fautanu got injured that we have seen Bradrick Jones at left tackle. And because, he didn't, Mike Tomlin kind of kept this an open book. Right, that left guard spot is not an open book. It is Spencer Anderson. That's who's going to start. We don't know who's going to start on the tackles. Dan Moore's been their best tackle. Feels like he probably will start at left tackle. It's going to be, is Bradrick Jones? Do they trust Bradrick Jones enough at left tackle? And then do they trust Troy Fautanu enough at right tackle after missing that time? So it's going to be interesting to see. I think it's going to come down to the quality of work that we see out of Troy Fautanu. I really think that's where it's going to come down to. I still am not ruling out him starting. I think he is ready. We've talked about this, why I think he's ready. And so don't rule out Troy Fautanu just yet from starting week 1.
That's great news. And what practice of the week will be key in determining if Fautanu is going to get the call? Which practice are you going to keep your eye on for that?
Well, I think Wednesday is going to be the big one. I think that they're going to maybe try and get him maybe a full practice. And I think that's going to be either Wednesday or Thursday. They're going to try and get him into a full practice here at some point this week. and make him take those full team reps. John, that's going to be where the money is made, if you will, this week with him. He not only has to show that he is healthy enough to play and that he's medically cleared to play, he has to show that he is better than the other options. He has to show that he is better than Dan Moore and Bradrick Jones just being the starting tackle duo. And so when he logs his full practice, he's going to have to perform very well in that practice and then the practice after that. And so these are very important practices for Fautanu, but I think starting Wednesday, I think they're going to try and at least get him one full practice at some point this week, probably on Thursday for sure, and then they'll see where he's at. If he puts in a really good practice and he looks ready to go, I think it's very possible he starts week 1. I'm not ruling it out yet.
And since it's a comparative issue, what have you been seeing of late out of Bradrick Jones and the issues that he's had over the course of the preseason?
Yeah, Bradrick Jones, we've talked about the injuries with him. I think he's feeling the ailments of some bumps and bruises. That's what Mike Tomlin would consider them, but they're legitimate injuries. So here's the thing. We've talked about the elbow a lot, right? That's been the big one, the elbow on the right arm. Well, now I noticed yesterday on Monday, he's wearing padded gloves on his hand and has lots of wrapping around his right thumb. So is he dealing with not only an elbow, but a thumb injury too? I think, by the way it looks, it seems like he might be dealing with a double whammy on his right arm. And that is a bad sign for anyone that is playing offensive line. But when you consider it the right arm, switching to the left side is actually not good for that. That's going to be his inside hand. Your inside hand needs to be strong. The outside hand is obviously very important, and that's why he got beat to the inside a few times this preseason. But if you make that inside hand, you lose all control. If you don't have the strength in that right arm, so maybe sticking at right tackle is the best for Bradrick Jones. Maybe he just has to sit and chill for a few weeks and heal up. We'll see. But he looks banged up. But they are so thin at tackle right now because Fautanu is not 100%. Dylan Cook's on injured reserve. Spencer Anderson, who is their fourth tackle, is starting at left guard because Siamalo is injured. And so there's just not a lot of tackle depth. So Bradrick Jones is kind of very important to what they have. And so that's where we see Bradrick Jones. His struggles are hand placement, hand usage, timing. When you talk about technique, that's his issue. He gets wide so he can get called for holds or get beaten, open up his chest, and get thrown out of the club. You see all of that. But I also think, he won't tell you that right arm is cumbersome. It is. You can see it on tape.
And of course, adding to all of this is we have a rookie starting at center for the first time since Kendrick Green had those honors with Ben Roethlisberger, and that didn't go well. So what do we think we see at center, in a regular season action?
Yeah, Zack Frasier is no Kendrick Green. That's what I will say. And Kendrick Green came into the league as really a guard that was masquerading as a center, and that is the issue with what they did there. We've talked about issues of them putting guys in maybe unnatural spots where they're not as comfortable. I think that is a prime example of it. That guy is a guard. He is not a center. Zack Frasier, he's a center. And he looks like a vet. He's calling protections, looks like a leader, gets out in space really well. He was a plus run blocker. You look at the preseason tape and it is awesome. I mean, it is really great tape when you watch what the preseason tape looked like. And so there's a lot of positives coming from Zack Frasier's preseason tape. I'm sure he's going to naturally probably have some ups and downs. You're a rookie. You have those. And I will say this, when we talk about key matchups this week, he is going to face Grady Jarrett, who is one of the best interior rushers in the NFL. He's 31, but still explosive, and he's small. So you are going to absolutely have to play with great pad level. You're going to have to be on your P's and Q's all day, hand usage, feet, all of that. They will have a great challenge when they face that guy. So we'll find out a lot right away about what Zack Frasier can do. But then you looked at what he did against the Bills, and he handled guys like Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, who are good players. He handled them pretty well. And so I think you have to feel pretty decently confident in what you have in Zack Frasier. So yeah, you're going to get an experience there. Same thing with Fautanu. If he plays, you're going to get experience. But these are guys that are going to learn very quickly. They came in very polished. And so, I think they're going to be really, really rock solid. And I think Frazier is going to be a foundational piece for them.
And for the audience out there, I mean, we're talking a lot about the offensive line, and it's kind of the unsexy thing to talk about, but it's been such an area of concern for the Steelers these recent years, and it's Nick's area of expertise in really analyzing, and you can see it from what Nick's giving us. So, of those five positions, it sounds like you feel pretty confident in center. Where's your biggest concern going into this first game? On that line.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Left guard's going to be tough. I think Spencer Anderson's had a great summer, but his specific issues with pad level, he's 6'5". Grady Jarrett, who I'm talking about, who is just a dynamic interior pass rusher, is 6 feet tall. That's natural leverage advantage to the max that you're going to see in the trenches, and Anderson lets his pad level swell. And so I'm worried that you're going to see him get knocked back a few times. But I also would be very concerned about Bradrick Jones against Matt Judon. The new edge rusher that the Falcons acquired from the New England Patriots this year. Matt Judon is a really good player. He's a really savvy rusher. If they get him up against Bradrick Jones, he rushes both sides. So he's not, going to be a left or right specific rusher. So he'll face probably both Moore or Fautanu and Jones, whatever combination they'll face. I do expect Bradrick Jones to be in the starting lineup. So he's got to be better than what he was in the preseason. Otherwise, a guy like Judon, man, he's better than Rousseau, and Rousseau obviously wreaked havoc against Bradrick Jones. And so we'll see how this goes. But I think probably right now, the Jarrett Anderson matchup is a real mismatch that I would be circling if I were the Falcons. But in terms of pass performance, right tackle, because that's where right now you have Jones slotted in at. So we'll see. But I don't think if Dan Moore has to block Lorenzo Carter, I think he can do that. I would be worried about Matt Judon though, and Grady Jarrett wrecking shop, or at least creating havoc, because this is a really good Falcons secondary. They have ball hawks on the back end between AJ Terrell, Justin Simmons, and Jesse Bates. And so even if they don't sack Russ, if they force him into an errant throw that turns into an interception, that's just as good enough too.
And given these matchup concerns that you just outlined in great detail, does it affect the running game or the passing game? And what do you think Arthur Smith, how is he going to treat his game plan given these concerns and heading into this matchup?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think the run game and pass game can be compromised, but I also think you're talking about an interior and a pass rush and second level of the Falcons that you can exploit to a degree. So if you can run the ball, and I would run it away from Grady Jarrett, that's where I would run it. That's really where you can get plus territory. So, I'd imagine they would attack, Carter a lot, for example. David Onyemata, who is a pretty solid interior defensive lineman, but you trust James Daniels to win that matchup? I would. And so you would attack those areas. But it affects the whole thing. It affects pass and run. And if they can't run, this is where the wide receiver conversation comes back up. When they get to 3rd and 11, do they have a guy that they can trust to win if they're, bracketing George Pickens? I think that's going to be another question that they'll have to answer if they get into those areas. So there's concerns here. And it affects everything. But if they can run the ball, then you can ease the pass game. Even if, Jarrett and Judon are winning, you can do different things, right? You can keep them off balance. You can run screens and use the aggressiveness and wins against them. You can run quick game stuff. So if you're running the ball, you open up a lot of different menu items for the passing game to neutralize the pass rush. And so I think that's going to be important for them. They're going to need to run the ball this game. And to his credit, I think that is where, you would get the benefit from Bradrick Jones. I think that's where he would be the big plus. And so that's where, you would really see it. And I'm interested to see how they kind of try and help maybe Broderick Jones against Judon. Do they play a lot of 12 personnel, keep Darnell Washington in? Does Jaylen Warren maybe stay in and Najee Harris, those guys? So they're probably going to deploy some help here to both of those guys that I mentioned. So we might see a lot of, 3-man route combinations trying to hold the line and maybe pushing the ball down the field. Would not surprise me at all. So the tight ends are going to be important as well in this game.
Speaking of Jaylen Warren, what is his status for the game regarding that injury he had?
He looks great. He's going to be fine. He was doing sprints yesterday. He was doing live teamwork. He was taking kickoffs. I mean, he was doing all of that yesterday. He was looking good, crisp. I don't have any concerns about what Jaylen Warren is going to bring to the table on Sunday. I don't think, that hamstring is bothering him at all. Now, obviously, you have to be a little worried about that obviously being re-aggravated, just because you always do with hamstrings. They are tricky injuries in nature. But he looks good. So I think he'll be full speed. I think he'll be ready to go. Maybe they ease him in a little bit. Maybe they rely a little bit more on Cordero Patterson than they usually would during a week. Wouldn't surprise me if that happens, but he'll be out there. No questions about where Jaylen Warren will be. He will be active.
And given the matchups between the offensive line and the defensive line, and the three styles of the three backs at our disposal, is there any back you think is going a better matchup for this game of those three that we have?
Specific style for the backs, I'm not sure is going to matter as much. But if I were the Steelers, I'd be wanting to get as efficient as possible, and I'd be wanting to try and wear down this front. The Falcons' front, it is, Jarrett's a really good player, but the front itself, it's a little undersized. Now, they drafted Rukaroro out of Clemson to try and kind of counteract this because he's a really big, well-built player. But you look at their front, the Steelers, if they can run the ball and play with some physicality, they could probably get some really nice gains. And so, to me, that plays right into Najee Harris's hands. That's what I would say.
Right.
So, right, like I think
When you say
Najee's going to have a
I'm thinking Najee pounding it in there.
right. Najee Harris, has a great skill of getting the hidden yards, and what I mean by that is he runs his legs through contact. He has obviously great ability to win in space and one-on-ones, but he falls forward. So even if you tackle him, if it's 3rd and 2 and you tackle him, even behind that gain, he usually falls forward for an extra 2 yards. So that's kind of where you get Najee Harris's strengths, and he's had a great summer. And so I think you should rely on him. Wear down the defense a little bit, make those linebackers cheat up, and then you hit right behind them, right? And then you can get big plays to guys like George Pickens or, Calvin Austin and Pat Freiermuth and these guys. That's going to be the game plan for the Steelers. They have an ability to exploit some things on this Atlanta front. It's going to be an improved defense, no doubt about it. They're going to be better than they were last year, and their front's pretty solid. But there are ways the Steelers can try and win, and they're going to play ball control. And so I think Najee Harris is going to be very important for that.
And you mentioned his name. A lot of people called his name in their fantasy drafts, George Pickens, one of the established stars on the Steelers offense, the other being Pat Freiermuth. Which of those two star pass catchers are in line to be fed? But could we see one of the lesser known receivers rise to the occasion in this Arthur Smith game plan for his former team?
I mean, I talked about that secondary earlier, right? AJ Terrell is a really good young corner. We'll see what George Pickens is made of. If he wants to make a statement that he's a wide receiver 1, this is a good week to do it. But this is really, I think, an interesting spot for Van Jefferson. It is. If he's going to step up and prove that he is someone to be reckoned with, he has a very winnable matchup. Listen, Mike Alford, they're solid players, but they're not elite corners by any means of the imagination. If Van Jefferson can continue his strong summer and show out here, be a 3rd down blanket for Russell Wilson, this is going to be very important for him. And I think, he has a real chance to do that. And so I think Van Jefferson might be the guy that benefits the most. But also, and I'm interested to see this, Justin Simmons now there. I'm interested to see how this kind of affects what the Falcons do against tight ends. You look a year ago, the worst team in the NFL against tight ends were the Atlanta Falcons. It was 100% the Atlanta Falcons. And before signing Justin Simmons, they didn't necessarily have someone that you could point to and say tight end eraser. Now maybe they do, but I'm interested to see how they kind of combat that. Are they going to stay back in too high a lot? Because if they stay back in too high, they're going to take Simmons out of that equation. Are they going to play 3 safety maybe? Are they going to bring in, someone like Richie Grant, who is their 3rd safety, so they have some depth there. So there's a lot that they could do to maybe try and match that. But, you're looking at a guy that can maybe have a big game, John. I mean, this could, on paper, if you look at last year's stats, and depending on kind of the different areas you could put them into, this could be a game where Pat Freiermuth is really key to them. So we'll see. I imagine a heavy dose of 88 on Sunday.
Interesting. And of course, you were on top of this all last week with Brandon Ayuk getting all the gold from the 49ers and him staying put in San Fran. And you and many other pundits were very down on our GM for sort of, dealing Deontay Johnson away and not really replacing him. And certainly I'm sure Omar Khan would like to see Van Jefferson have a good game just to sort of say, hey, well, we didn't totally bungle this thing. But what do you think the long-term fallout of this whole situation with the receivers and how it's been handled this year by the Steelers Brain Trust?
Long-term fallout, the investment in wide receiver next year will be significant. You look at one of the commonalities from Omar Khan every single year, a spot that is a weakness the year before gets just completely flooded with talent the next year. For example, look at what they did at linebacker this year, right? Peyton Wilson, Patrick Queen, just flooded it even after the injuries. The offensive line wasn't good enough, so they drafted 3 of them. I mean, you look at that, right? That's kind of what I mean by this. So, safety last year wasn't good enough. So here comes Deshaun Elliott. I think you look at that punter, Cam Johnston. So they really flood positions of need. That's something that I've noticed with Omar Khan. And so that's going to be your long-term fallout. Now, we'll see if one of these guys can step up. They got to find out what they have in Roman Wilson. That's going to be a huge part of this year. Find out what you have in your 3rd-round pick. I know he might not be ready for a huge role week 1, but let's just look at the talent of the room. I mean, you hope that he's cooking by the end of the season where he is, in terms of hierarchy, no lower than wider, 4 on the hierarchy of targets. He's behind Van Jefferson because Van Jefferson had a nice revitalization. That's cool, but you got to find out what you have in him. And so I think that's going to be a part of this long-term plan too. But next year, you can almost guarantee they are going to address this room very heavily. I would almost put money on the same thing for corner. So I think those 2 positions, are going to be very important for them this year to find out what they have. But like you look towards the offseason next year, obvious needs that they're going to have to address. And, I didn't even mention quarterback when we're talking about positions of need that were flooded. I mean, the whole quarterback room got overturned. So when Omar Khan sees something wrong, he goes about it and fixes it. And so that's your long-term outlook. Your short-term outlook is they need to find somebody here that could be a 2 or a 3. And Van Jefferson's going to have to be that guy. He had a great summer. I think his preseason games were very encouraging, John. The tape's good. He's open a lot on tape. It's encouraging. Can he get back to 2021 Van Jefferson? If the Steelers get 600 yards out of Van Jefferson this year, they are going to be elated. They should be. That's what the ceiling should be to him. If that's what they get out of him, they're going to be very happy. But I'm skeptical still because You look at the guys that they have, and I mean, listen, Brandon Johnson, who they just signed to the practice squad, is the second leading receiver from last year in that wide receiver room. He had 289 yards last year. That's more than Van Jefferson had. That's more than Scotty Miller had. That's more than Calvin Austin had. Only George Pickens had more. So, they have some other guys on the practice squad. So if you're looking long-term in season, you look at Brandon Johnson and Ben Skowronek and Quez Watkins, 3 receivers that are vets on the practice squad. Your long-term outlook in the season is one of those guys jumps up to the active roster from the practice squad.
And among that analysis of the receiver room and how it is going to impact the future, you mentioned the Q word, quarterback. So we got to circle back around because it has been sort of a dating game with Mike Tomlin and these quarterbacks over the last 4 years. It seems like they've been shuffling them in and shuffling them out, and none of the relationships have taken hold. This was almost like Mike Tomlin after a divorce from Big Ben, when he was absolutely infatuated with his franchise quarterback and never had to give it a second thought. Now it's another man up in Russell Wilson. What's your thoughts on how Tomlin's been handling this situation, how Wilson's going to look against the Falcons and in this Arthur Smith offense?
Well, I anticipate he's going to look exactly like he looked last year. And that's what he's a double-edged sword. He throws a great deep ball. His physical tools in terms of the arm talent are all there. And when he plays well, he looks great still. It's just going to be, can he minimize the negativity in terms of sacks? Can he minimize the negativity in terms of turnover-worthy plays? I think Mike Tomlin has done a fine job handling this. I mean, Justin Fields had 2+ weeks of first team opportunities, and then when Russell Wilson came back, split the first team opportunities with him. And to be quite honest, John, I was there every single day. I watched the preseason tapes, and yes, Justin Fields is dynamic and fun, but he's also inconsistent and up and down. He didn't blow Russell Wilson out of the water. In terms of who looked better in practices, I think Russell Wilson did. So honestly, I don't think there is a huge issue with the idea that Russell Wilson should be the starter. And so I'm not like super high on any of these guys. I think, sometimes what you pay for is what you get. And the Steelers did pay very cheaply for both these guys. They paid, conditional 6 for Fields and the veteran minimum for Russell Wilson. But I think Russ has strengths you can build around. We talk about that run game, right? They can run the ball. You can start to get play action deep shots in there. His deep ball is still elite. It is there. If you can start to get that running game going and cheat those linebackers up, Russ can fire that thing right behind him and get some explosive plays. And so, I think they'll have better quarterback play than they did a year ago. I think that they have to be cognizant of the natural negativity that he will bring. He holds onto the ball a lot. In this offensive line, it's not a great combination with that O-line and what you have with Russ and his negativity with the sacks and pocket management. But we'll kind of see how it goes. But I don't blame them for how they went about this quarterback situation. You look at who was on the market. They took 2 dart throws. It makes sense. They were in a draft position where it was really hard to go up and get a rookie as well, if you even wanted to go up and get one of the rookies. So really, it's fine. It's fine management. And Russ has his inherent issues, but they do have strengths they can build around for him. And in this game specifically, if they can run the ball, maybe you can get some of those underneath stuff. I don't think you're going to see, like a 50-yard bomb over the top in this one. At least I wouldn't bank on it, because those 2 safeties back there with Bates and Simmons are just so dynamic, and they're ball hawks that you don't really want to test it. But could you get, 20-yard over routes that turn into 70-yard touchdowns? Sure.
Now, just give me a little. I'm at a campground, by the way. I'm doing this on PTO, but because we're setting up this regular season tilt with the Falcons. But what's your over under for Justin Fields' special gadget plays in this game, and how do you see this game going? Let's close it out with that. Let's give you a little forecast here, what we're going to see.
So it's interesting. So when you look at how this game probably is going to end up going, I think I would rely more on how the Steelers offense plays. We didn't really talk much about the defense versus the Falcons but the Falcons have revamped that offense. They have a really good O-line. They have a few good weapons, and Kirk Cousins should be able to distribute the ball to them. It's a solid group. This looks like a solid team overall. But they're inexperienced. Cousins is coming off an Achilles injury. Will he be rusty? We'll see. Are they going to get the ball out quick? And are the Steelers going to be able to tackle in space? That'll be important. If the Steelers can run the ball efficiently in this game and hit maybe a few explosive plays in the run game, Jaylen Warren maybe hits a few explosives, or Cordero Patterson, whoever. If they can hit a few explosives in the run game and get those linebackers and attack those linebackers in space, I think you can really open up things for Pat Freiermuth. I think you can really open up things then, all behind that, if they have to focus on Freiermuth and have to kind of bring Simmons down into the box and start getting him, you're going to limit their ability to bracket Pickens in some ways. And then you can start getting one-on-ones with Pickens against Terrell. And even though A.J. Terrell's a really good player, I'm trusting my alpha receiver every day of the week. And so their game plan is going to be very simple, but really it's going to come down to one thing. It's going to come down to how the Steelers offensive line plays. It is that trench matchup, Anderson versus Jarrett, Judon versus whoever that right tackle or left tackle is. These are the important matchups. If they can protect Russ and give him time, they'll have chances in this game. And so that's really, where it comes down to. This should be a good game for the Steelers. It's a good test. The Falcons are a much improved team from a year ago. They're a different team. There's a lot of uncertainty around kind of what they're going to do because they have a new DC, new head coach, new OC, and their offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, has never been an offensive coordinator in the NFL. So what's his personal sprinkles going to be, in his scheme? So there's going to be a lot for the Steelers to ingest. I don't love the matchup for them for the reasons I've talked about. I think some of the injuries come in really inopportune areas. I think they're going to keep it close because I think the Steelers defense actually, is going to be pretty solid against this group. There's a lot of talent on that Falcons offense, but I also think the Steelers have a lot of talent to match them. If Kirk Cousins is really rusty, sometimes Kirk Cousins can get into areas where, he makes bad decisions, throws picks. The Steelers defense can make turnovers happen. That's another place where they can really make inroads. And so, this one's shaping up to me, like the Steelers. I don't think it's going to be like a San Francisco game from last year, but it is shaping up, where I think the Falcons kind of have a lot of obvious advantages on paper. And so if we're going by on paper, kind of looking at it, I would favor the Falcons personally in this one, just because of things I talked about. But then we're going to learn a lot about a lot of these Steelers players: Van Jefferson, Spencer Anderson, Bradrick Jones, Dante Jackson, even all of these guys that we've talked about. You're going to learn a lot about them. If these guys step up, the Steelers can win this game. But it's a winnable game. But I do think they just have been hit in a lot of areas. I think the offensive line uncertainty in this game specifically is just it's a tough pill to swallow for them. So yeah, I'm leaning Falcons a little bit here. But would I be shocked if the Steelers win? No.
And we would love it to be shocked. But as you said, the recurring theme with the offensive line that has been an issue these 4 years under 4 different starting quarterbacks. But hey, as Tomlin says, you play the games that are on the schedule. And as for these Steelers, here we go. And we will be back here next Tuesday to do the postmortem on this one and then look ahead to the next one on the slate, where Russell Wilson goes home to Denver, at least his home of the last year. So that will be interesting as well. And Nick will be all over it as usual. Until then, Nick, have a great game, a great trip to Atlanta, and we'll be reading all your stuff on PennLive.